Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Fair Housing Summit. I'm so incredibly excited for this event today. There's been an immense amount of work and inspiration that's been poured into this summit today. So I'm excited that this is going to be occurring, and I'm eager for you all to learn. I'm eager to learn, so it's going to be a great event. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We have an action-packed event schedule. It's rich of information, packed all morning with experts from across the country who are going to share their expertise with you all. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ashley Fordham. I am your 2024 Oregon Realtors President, and I'm excited to be here, and I'm eager to pass over to Leslie, who is our Diversity Chair member. So before I get into that, just a couple of housekeeping items. I want to remind everybody that we have civil conversation expectations during this summit today. We want to ensure that it's a productive civil conversation for everyone. And attendees who post inflammatory, disrespectful, or unrelated messages or opinions within the chat will be removed from the Fair Housing Summit without a refund or continuing education credits. We thank you all for engaging in this event with the spirit of learning and respect. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our incredible sponsors. Our gold sponsor is Willamette Valley Multiple Listing Service. Our silver sponsor is Online Ed and Realtor.com. Our bronze sponsor is the Grand Hotel in Salem, Oregon, and OCMLS. So it is my distinct pleasure at this point in time to welcome our MC, Ashley Contreras, who is an amazing human being and a very dear friend of mine. For those of you that don't know Ashley, she is an incredibly enthusiastic about our local community and considers it a privilege to build truly genuine relationships with her clients and her peers. She currently serves as the local vice president at Mid-Valley Association of Realtors and is the 2024 chair of the Oregon Realtors Diversity Committee. So Ashley, it is my privilege to introduce you and welcome you and turn the microphone over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Good morning, everybody. Wow, what an exciting opportunity we have here today to gather amongst our peers and load our realtor toolkits with lots of new tools. I'm really honored and excited to be here today, and I just want to thank you for taking time to educate yourselves and to level up in how we can serve. So thank you. We will be presenting you with lots of information today. And so kind of think of this as a broad overview of information. And we'd love to hear from you if there is anything that stands out today that you could see us bringing back as a future webinar or a bigger learning opportunity. But we're really excited to kind of get a lot of information out there today in the name of fair housing. This event will be recorded, and we will be inviting lots of these presenters back for future webinars. For CE, you do have to stay on the full 3 hours. And if you're watching alone, your CE will be processed within about a week. If you're watching with a group, please confirm that the host worked with Oregon Realtors on your CE tracking. We do encourage you at this time to turn your phones on silent, put those emails on mute, really stay present with us and really lean in and, just absorb as much as you can from this learning opportunity today. We will have breaks. We will have bathroom breaks, coffee breaks, and opportunities for reflection in between each session. So with that, I have the honor of introducing our first moderator for today's session. We have Rhonda Wymore, the fabulous, from WVMLS, who is also our gold level sponsor. So we are very grateful to them and to Rhonda and her team for all that they do. So thank you for kicking us off this morning.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm excited to be here too. I love learning and changing and growing because that is what's required in our industry. And in fact, the demographics of who is buying and selling homes is always shifting. But in light of the pandemic and other socio-political economic factors, we're seeing some dramatic swings. So in this session, we want to empower agents to support these changing client markets through knowing what these changes look like and what's driving them. So let's start off the morning by looking at the shifting landscape of home ownership with OOEA Senior Economic Analyst Joshua Leaner. Josh Leaner develops the quarterly Oregon Economic Forecast, including outlooks for employment, income, and housing. Mr. Leaner also acts as the state's de facto vice economist by forecasting revenues for Oregon Lottery, Oregon Judicial Department, and state marijuana and tobacco taxes. I see. Mr. Leaner's economic research has been cited by Calculated Risk, The Economist, Financial Times, National Public Radio, New York Times, The Washington Post, and a lot of other media. Prior to joining the state, Mr. Leaner worked as a research analyst for a local economic development organization and published a paper on the border tax effect between Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And I think economists are super interesting, and actually smart people are super sexy. So I'm really excited to hear what Josh has to bring us today. Take it away, Josh.
Great. Thanks for having me. That's probably the first time I've ever had an introduction like that, so I love it. Here today to share a few things based upon our current outlook and given the topic of the conference in fair housing, a number of growing opportunities within the home ownership market in terms of both customers, buyers, and sellers, and potential supply, because we know inventory is such an issue today, and probably will be for some time. But let's start first with this high level look, right? As you all know, we have terrible housing affordability today, the worst we've seen in a couple generations, and we've priced a lot of households out of the market all across the U.S. and certainly here in Oregon. Here are some of the major metropolitan areas where our office tracks affordability on a regular basis. You can see the share of local households in our communities that can actually swing the monthly payment to the bank if you buy at current interest rates and you buy at the typical median sold home in any given month, and you average property taxes and insurance and things like that, what share of households can actually afford it? And right now, we're significantly lower than we have been historically, and significantly lower since interest rates started rising back in early 2022 for the most part. And you can see the differences across the state. And so how do we get out of this, right? We're kind of in this bad equilibrium, this depressed equilibrium for the housing market, where transaction volumes are low, prices are high, prices and affordability is terrible. And so we're muddling through at a very low volume. And of course, you guys care about volume of activity predominantly. And of course, economically, we care about affordability more broadly to help Oregonian households make ends meet. And so how do we get out of this? How do we get affordability back to sort of some semblance of normal activity, which will help then drive the volume of sales and activity and things like that? And so this is our affordability chart that comes out of our economic models. We're not forecasting housing affordability specifically, but we forecast population, we forecast income, we forecast interest rates, we forecast home prices. And between all of those sort of things, you can come up with an affordability metric like you see here. And you can see we go over the next 2 years, we go from terrible affordability to kind of average affordability by early 2026. How do we get there? That's that first set of bullet points there. There's 3 things to keep in mind when it comes to affordability. We're going to see interest rates decline. They've come down a little bit in the last handful of months. They're creeping back up in recent weeks. A lot of that has to do with the strength in the economy, the inflation data, how quickly the Federal Reserve is pivoting to cutting interest rates. They're saying they're going to cut interest rates, but of course they haven't yet. There's some speculation they might even cut as early as March. That's off the table now. The economic data is too strong. The inflation data is too strong. They're not going to cut next month by all accounts. Maybe they'll cut in May, probably more likely at June at this point. But they're saying they're going to cut interest rates 3 or 4 times this year. So that's going to put probably mortgage rates in the 6.5% range by the end of the year, maybe closer to 5.5% at the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. And so that decline in interest rates going from basically 7% closer to 5% by early 2026 will be the bulk of the improvement in this affordability metric. The 67 there in parentheses means 2/3, 67% of this improvement in affordability is due to interest rates declining over the next 2 years. Whether we get that exactly, we will see. But in terms of that's the biggest driver today, and that's the biggest driver today because of the sort of that third sub bullet point where home prices, right? Like we used to have home price declines built into our forecast. Affordability is so bad, the volume of transactions is so low that to get the market to clear, probably thought we would need home price declines. We haven't seen it. We saw very small declines, mid-single digits at largest so far across the Oregon markets, and it kind of has stopped. And we're muddling through at these high prices. Now, we have slower growth built into the forecast, a few percentage points of price appreciations, not necessarily 5, 6, 7% year after year after year. And so we see a little bit of a slower price appreciations in the next couple of years, lower than historical trends, but no big declines. And so again, like the home price perspective is not really going to help with affordability. It's going to be the drop in interest rates and then ongoing income growth. The key point there would be a year of typical income growth in Oregon of 4, 5, 6% per household, 4% per worker, 5, 6% per household typically is where we're at. That is equivalent financially, affordability wise, to a 0.5% reduction in the mortgage rate. Because if your income goes up, you can afford a larger payment to the bank because you have a better ability to spend because your incomes are growing. And so normal income growth over the next 2 years will also de facto act as a 1 percentage point decline in the mortgage rate in terms of affordability, because affordability is not just the housing costs, it's also your ability to finance and pay those housing costs. And so you combine those 3 things together, drop in interest rates, rising income, and a little bit slower growth in home prices, we can get to some semblance of normal affordability and transaction volumes by early 2026 based upon our current forecast. There's a lot of risk there. I think the biggest risk in the near term is if we do get mortgage rates to drop as expected, does that just go into prices? Do prices just go at 5, 6, 10%, on a year-over-year basis? Because again, you can afford a larger payment. And if that's the case, we're not going to see the improvement in affordability. We'll just see higher prices for these low volume of transactions, which isn't really better unless you're a seller. It's good news if you're a seller, but it's bad news for the economy. It's bad news for buyers. It's bad news for the overall market. Looking forward, the demographics are really set up to be great for home ownership in the decade ahead. And the biggest part here has to do with the millennials, that big bulge, dark blue chunk, that generation there in the middle of Oregon's current population. And the reason is because as we age into our 30s and increasingly into our 40s, we know home ownership really picks up. 35 years old, 34 and a half technically in Oregon right now, is where we hit 50-50 owner-renter, right? Is that mid-30s in Oregon. That's across all of the major markets. Every time I look at the data, it's about the same everywhere across the state. And so as that peak millennial is now in their early 30s, which are first-time homebuyer years, they're about to be in their mid-30s, which is, again, 50-50 owner-renter, and in the decade ahead, increasingly into their 40s, where most of us are majority homeowners. So that big bulge of millennials aging into their home buying years is a big driver of homeownership demand, both today and in the decade to come. A couple other quick notes. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit, but the baby boomers, downsizing, retiring, migration after that sort of stuff, there's a little bit of that. It's really not nearly as big of a share of the market as I think the conventional wisdom suggests. And then the other thing to note is the vast majority of Americans and Oregonians is we age in place, and we really don't start to move or downsize or any of that sort of stuff until our early to mid 80s. And a lot of that is health related. It's not so much I'm going to downsize because I need a smaller home. It's not so much necessarily I'm going to go live closer to the grandkids. There is some of that, but most of us are staying and aging in place until we have to move for health reasons. We didn't move. My grandma stayed in her home, her adulthood home until she was 90. When in 90 is when we moved her into a residential care facility and was closer to my aunts and nephews and cousins and that sort of stuff. Right. So that's the typical pattern we see play out sometime in your 80s or maybe your 90s. And so that the impact of baby boomer housing supply coming on the market is really a 2030s discussion and not a 2020s discussion. It's coming. It's very real. It's going to be an impact on the market, but that's the next decade, not this decade, by and large. And so when it comes to one of those increasing opportunities in the housing market and shifts relative to our historical patterns, would be increasing in diversity, even in Oregon, right? Where we're not a super diverse state. We're, somewhere 30th, 31st from an overall diversity perspective. We have a relatively large Hispanic and Latino population in Oregon, and then, above average size Asian population in Oregon, and then in indigenous populations, American Indian and Alaska Native, but then obviously very low populations when it comes to Black Oregonians is a very small share of our population. Some of that's tied to all of the history of our state and all the issues that come with that. But overall, we still have younger generations being more diverse. This is going to have some impacts on our society, on our economy, on our workforce, and on our housing markets in the years to come, where you can see that big bulge of millennials is about one third of millennials in Oregon today identifies Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, in some way, shape, or form. And that's going to increase even further in the years ahead. As you can see, Gen Z is 40% BIPOC and 60% white, non-Hispanic. Compare that with the baby boomers, where we're talking 10-15% identify as BIPOC compared to white, non-Hispanic. So again, this is going to have some shifts in the overall economy and the types of people working in our workforce and what other impacts that may have in the broader economy. In homeownership, we're already seeing this, right? Where if we look at actual new mortgage originations in the state, this is annual data, it's lagged. So we only have 2022 numbers. The 2023 full annual numbers aren't available yet. You can see, right? We're now 25% of new mortgage originations in the state of Oregon are coming from BIPOC borrowers, right? So again, we're closer to 30% of the overall population it identifies as, non-white Hispanic. and 17% of homeowners today. So we have lower home ownership among our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color across the state, but that's starting to increase. We're starting to see more diverse borrowers. We're starting to see some of these opportunities become across all of our race and ethnic populations around the state. So this will continue in the years to come, just given underlying demographics. Another place where we're seeing some different shifts and increases in home ownership would be among LGBTQ communities, and in particular, in the census data, it doesn't ask you if you filled out the decennial census, or if you get the American Community Survey or things like that. They don't ask you your sexual orientation, right? But what they do ask, and what we do have good data on, is when you say your household composition, you're living together. Are you living together as a same-sex couple or a opposite-sex couple? Are you married, or are you unmarried partners, or are you just roommates, right? And so like we have some information on household composition. It's not exactly sexual orientation, of course, because here we're talking about same-sex households. So this means people are saying, hey, we live together either as unmarried partners or as spouses, and we're a same-sex couple. It's about 1% nationally. Here in Oregon, out of all 50 states, Oregon, we rank third highest for same-sex couples compared to the rest of the country. The Portland metropolitan area ranks third highest for large metros in the nation. It goes San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, Austin being the top 4 nationwide. And then you can see around the rest of the country and the rest of the state. You can see here, these are metropolitan statistical areas and micropolitan statistical areas across the country. If you're sort of teal, green, or yellow, you're average or above average when it comes to that 1% of all households being a same-sex couple. If you're blue or purple, you're below average. And so you can see across most of the Western Pacific Northwest, the western side of the states, we're average or above average in a lot of ways. The spots in Oregon that are below average would be Josephine County, so Grants Pass, and then somewhat surprisingly would be Deschutes County. And it's not so much necessarily the city of Bend, it's the rest of Deschutes County. Technically in the data, there's 0 households in the data that identifies a same-sex couple, and so that's really dragging down the Deschutes number, whereas the city of Bend numbers are around the national average of about 1%. We can see the list here where I said Oregon's third, Portland is third for large metros. And then if we look at the neighborhood level, public use microdata, it's a geography of about 100,000 people. If we look at these sort of neighborhood or sections of city areas that are highest for same-sex couples around the country, Central East Side of Portland is the 7th highest in the nation, with nearly 5% of all households in that part of the city identifying as a same-sex household. You can see the order there. We go Palm Springs, we go the Castro, we go Hell's Kitchen, and then we go with not quite downtown Seattle, but near downtown Seattle as well is quite high. So what does this do for home ownership? 3 things to note is if you look at the data, there is an increase in households identifying as a same-sex couple among those younger generations. It's not necessarily, if you read the research, it's not necessarily that LGBTQ and changes in sexual orientation are becoming more common over time. It's more that with broader societal acceptance, we're seeing people more willing to identify that in a public setting than it has been the case historically. And so overall, we are seeing more same-sex couples at those younger generations. We're seeing more home ownership, more rental households, and things like that. That's just more of a sort of a basis in the data versus something that's truly a broader societal trend. But it does mean we're going to see a growing share of same-sex couples buying houses in the data, just because we're more willing to identify and speak that in today than we have historically. The other thing to note about home ownership relative to married couples and same-sex, whether you're opposite sex or same-sex married couples, is home ownership rates are lower for younger same-sex couples than for opposite-sex couples in the data. It's true here in Oregon. You can kind of see the blue line is below the yellow line, sort of the younger than 40 cohort. The same is true nationally. The data doesn't have quite the noise in it as it does nationally, but I wanted to show the Oregon numbers because we're talking about Oregon. But the same is true nationally, where home ownership rates are lower for 20s and 30-something same-sex married couples compared to opposite-sex married couples. But for 40 and older, 45 and older, they're about the same, if not a little bit higher for same-sex couples than for opposite-sex couples to come. That's true in Oregon. That's true in urban Oregon. That's true in rural Oregon. It's true across the board. At first, I thought maybe this difference among younger couples was more of an urban thing, right? Housing affordability is even more out of whack in a lot of urban areas than it is in rural areas. And so maybe it was just a composition of, if you're living in Portland, housing affordability is so much worse from both a sticker price perspective and an income adjusted basis perspective and things like that. So that doesn't seem to be the case. It just seems to be nearly true that younger households have lower home ownership, but older households have higher home ownership. The third thing I wanted to bring up would be a shift in our population. It's related to age, it's related to marriage, it's related to having kids or not, and all of these things intertwine, where we have an increase in the number of one-person households, single-person households, where it's a growing share of our demography. It's a growing share of the housing market. It's a growing share of the homeownership market as well. And this is expected to continue in the years ahead. Now, I think I don't want to overdo it here, but I want to highlight something where I think a lot of this discussion, and rightfully so, there's been this increase in young single female home buyers in recent years. And that's true, right? That certainly 30-something, 40-something single women are adding, coming into home ownership at higher rates than certainly single men among those age. But overall, a lot of this long-term driver that we're seeing when we see these top-line statistics of percentage of homes owned by single women versus single men versus married couples or whatever, the largest increases, the vast majority of these increases are not among younger or middle-aged buyers, it's among older households. And so that speaks to maybe a little bit of divorce in household composition changes for that reason, a little bit of that, but a lot of it is mortality and the simple fact that women live longer than men. And so if we're going to see surviving spouses, some widows, it's going to be much more common it's a widow and not a widower, right? And so that is the largest increase here, would be among older one-person households. There's some other research going on, what does that mean being tied to community and loneliness? I know I've been working with some counties to talk about this in terms of the data. They're worried about, shut-in seniors, either shut in physically in health for health reasons or just socially in isolation and things like that. So again, this both provides growth opportunities for home buyers, again, among younger, predominantly women in their 30s and 40s, but then also single adults, older adults as well. And then obviously new supply coming onto the market 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Lastly, I wanted to touch on new housing supply. This is the key crux of our housing market and our terrible affordability. Yes, interest rates are terrible right now. That's a big sap on the near term, but long term, our affordability in Oregon has been terrible. It's probably going to continue to be terrible because we simply are not building enough homes relative to household formation, relative to demand to live here. And so when we turn things into a bidding war, when you have a constrained supply, not enough supply, it turns into higher prices, and it impacts our neighbors who can least afford to do it the most. And so the one thing I would highlight here is our baseline forecast is not super strong for new construction. We need even more new construction than we're going to see. We're a little bit optimistic that we'll see a little bit better numbers in the years to come. One reason why is it took decades to get into this mess. It's going to take decades to get out of this mess, is there's been a lot of legislation passed from a public policy perspective. The one I just wanted to highlight here, some of you probably know this much better than I do. Some of you might just be seeing this for the first time. There's a recent Oregon law called the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, where our office comes into play is literally me, will be doing this analysis where we're looking at how many housing units do we actually think we need based upon We've underproduced historically. So what do we think that number reasonably looks like? We have some expectations of future growth based upon those demographics, based upon population changes and things like that. What do we think we need to build to accommodate the new Oregonians and home buyers and renters in the years to come? And then we have to take into some special considerations. One would be second homes, especially on the coast, where in some counties, even if they're building new housing, the growth in second homes and vacation homes on the coast has more than offset any new supply that's been built in the market. And so again, like that's an impact on the housing market for people trying to live and work in their communities. And then obviously housing for our unhoused neighbors, where we know we have a huge need among those who cannot afford anything, right? How homelessness, it can sound tautological, it can sound kind of like a no-brainer, but it's true. The vast majority of reason of why people do not have housing is because they cannot afford housing. They cannot find housing they can afford. And of course, there's other issues on top of that, whether it comes to mental health or drug issues or employment opportunities or other sort of things. But it comes down to having a roof over your head. Can you afford to have that? And so again, the special consideration for different types of units at different levels of affordability and different income brackets. You put all that together, that's our office's role as the analysis here. Then it's going to go to DLCD and OHCS, so land use and zoning issues and regulations and permitting processes and the types of housing we need to identify some of these sort of things. And so this should help with affordability. This should help with housing production in the years to come. But this is a new law. It's just getting underway this year. We're going to do these sets of estimates. By the second half of this year, these numbers will be out. How cities implement them, how they meet these targets, what do they do if they don't hit their targets? That's still a little bit up in the air and will be determined over the course of the next several years. That's everything I had for today. Here's my contact information. I'm always happy to chat. Reach out if you have any questions. You can follow along our website here if you're interested in any of this type of research. We're publishing something about once a week on that website you see there. So have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Joshy. We did have a quick question on the one person household slide. And was that one adult per household or one person? And is that by who's on the deed or who lives in the home?
It is literally one person. So it's adult. It's going to be an adult. And it does not include single parents, right? That would be a 2 or 3 person household. That's it, just one adult.
Thank you so much. Those statistics were very yummy. I especially love the slide that said the demographics are great for home ownership, but I just about fell out of my chair when you said millennials are now middle-aged. I am middle-aged. Millennials are children.
Yeah, I wish that were the case, but I'm now middle-aged myself. So
yeah. Thank you so much for that great information. We are going to take a quick break, everyone. If you want to in the chat while we're taking a break until about 9:30, would you just please reflect, how does homeownership strengthen the community around us? We'll take a break and we'll resume in just a few minutes. Thank you again so much, Josh.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are moving right along into our second session of the day. So to kind of frame us in our training today, we have now learned about who is buying homes in Oregon. So next, we're going to focus on how we can expand homeownership opportunities. So today, I am excited to announce our next moderator is Alexia Smokler, the director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs from the National Association of Realtors. We're really excited to have you today. Alexia represents NAR's positions on fair housing to Congress and federal agencies and leads NAR's ACT initiative, which emphasizes accountability, culture change, and training to advance fair housing in the industry. Thank you so much, Alexia, for joining us today. And we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley and Oregon Realtors. I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. Hello to my friends on the Best Coast. Excited to talk with you all today about expanding homeownership opportunities. So with our stellar panel here, just a few words of setting the stage. We're here to talk about fair housing today, and at NAR, we really define fair housing expansively. So compliance, don't break the law, don't get thrown in realtor jail. That's the floor, all right? You have to do that. It's your legal and ethical requirement. And we absolutely have to make sure that we have the best practices in place so that we are treating every customer or client with equal professional service. But we also recognize the legacy of past discrimination that came before the Fair Housing Act. Things like racial zoning, racial covenants, redlining, the denial of GI benefits for the returning Black World War II veterans leave us with persistent gaps in homeownership rates among demographic groups. The Fair Housing Act didn't provide any remedy for those generations of lost opportunity and that resulting inability to pass down generational wealth that white people had over many decades in this country. And so our work as fair housing advocates has to go beyond don't discriminate. We also need to be looking at how can we close those gaps? How can we meet people where they are, given the historic and present day barriers that many groups still face. So I'm excited to welcome our panel today that's going to talk about expanding homeownership opportunity. Now, Josh just told us that our population is growing increasingly diverse. We just published last week our latest snapshot on race and home buying, which I'm going to post in the chat, which shows that the Hispanic and Asian homeownership rates continue to climb. That Black homeownership rate, though, the Black-white gap is bigger than it was 10 years ago. And indeed, it's about the same as it was 50 years ago. So we have more work to do. So in this environment, with the headwinds that we face, with high housing prices, with high interest rates, first, I want to set the stage by asking our panel, what are some of the biggest obstacles that our first time and our first generation buyers are facing? And I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce yourself when you come off the mic. So Heidi Martin, can we kick it over to you first to help us set the stage? What are the obstacles that our buyers are facing? Did we lose Heidi? I saw her a second ago. Oh, she's reconnecting. Luis, you want to hop in here first?
Yeah, I'll kind of start off. So my name is Luis. I'm from Dev Northwest, and I've been at this organization for about 10 years. One of the things that we're seeing is with the BIPOC community, there is oftentimes a lot of trust barriers that we're seeing. So when I'm going in to do some of my outreach and explain some of my programs, it's always one of these, I've heard this story, it's too good to be true. How are these programs? how is it that this is going to help me get into a home? And so that's one of the barriers that I'm seeing is as I'm talking with some of the families that we're trying to help. A lot of the programs that are available, there's a little bit of hesitation, and there's hesitation because of some of the predatory lending that has taken place, some of the just some of the issues that we've seen with our housing historically. And then the other one too is historically as an organization, and I'm just going to speak on Dev Northwest behalf here, is when we've received a program or we're getting ready to roll something out, we've missed the gap. We've identified that we have ourselves missed that opportunity where we've now slowed things down. We make sure that things are translated. We make sure that if we're going to do some level of outreach or advertisement on what resources available, that we're being equitable across the board. And historically, we've never done that. We are so excited and get ramped up that we publish everything in English, and it goes towards all of the same partners that we've worked with that are also targeting the same families in our communities. And we're not taking a step back to be able to say, let's slow this down so we are able to hit the Latino community or our African American community. And that's something that's been really important, and we've really pivoted. But so I'll kind of start there and see if Heidi's able to, is she still here?
I'm not seeing her. It looked like she was having internet trouble.
Heidi has had the technology curse day from
Yeah.
the computer not working, and then the internet going out. It seems she's having some connection issues today.
The other, I'll say one more thing, Alex, and then we can move on. The other thing too that we know why there's a big gap between some of the demographics that we see is and we just know this, like if my parents owned a home, it becomes a little bit easier for me, and that's just statistically, like it becomes easier for me to become a homeowner. And historically, there's been barriers that have been put so that Blacks haven't been able to purchase a home. They've been displaced from land. We know a little bit of what that history looks like in the Portland area, and same with the Latino families and with our Asian community. If their parents haven't known, it becomes a little bit harder for those families. So there's already a huge disadvantage when we're going into home ownership, and we talk about why there's a big gap. And a big reason for that is, if my parents own a home, they can tap into that equity to help me with that down payment. And a lot of these families don't have that opportunity.
So many good points, Luis. Distrust based on previous predatory lending practices, language access, family not getting that knowledge from a familial history of home ownership. In the data that we look at, in terms of qualifying for a mortgage, and maybe Scott, you can speak on this, we see down payment, debt to income ratio, and credit score as being three of the biggest barriers that families face when they're trying to make that leap from renting into home ownership. Scott, I don't know if you want to speak on that or if we should just move on to the solutions.
I'll speak a little bit to it because I think what's really amazing is that I think the big key for us here at Oregon Housing. So my name is Scott Shaw, Assistant Director of Homeownership Lending. I've been in lending for almost 30 years. I've been at Oregon Housing for 5 now. I think data is kind of the big key. We're doing a lot of data crunching. We're picking up a lot of numbers, and it's really interesting just what we're learning about who owns a home, who doesn't own a home, how much money does it require to buy a home, what are the barriers with respect to credit score, because it's not, one would think that low credit score, high debt ratio, and no down payment would all be stacked together. That's not always the case. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to actually gather that data together, put it together in such a way that we can figure out what those barriers are for each demographic group and try to solve it. I hope that helps a little bit.
That's great, Scott. Thank you. And Luis, could you reintroduce yourself? I think.
Yeah, I'm with an organization in the Eugene area. It's called Dev Northwest, that's short for Development of Northwest, and we are in the Lane County area. We have an office in Springfield, Corvallis, Salem, and in the Milwaukee. So I cover a lot of the I-5 corridor.
Awesome, thank you. So we've just briefly touched on the challenges. I mean, we could write books about it, but let's move into solutions. So I know you all run various programs. Tell us, what tools should realtors have in their toolkit as they're working with these buyers and helping folks get into home ownership for the first time, or possibly the first person in their family.
Lucy,
And
okay.
let's go to Scott first. Sorry.
I was just going to say, is it okay if I go first? So, you know, Oregon Housing, so we are part of NCSA, which is National, State Housing Organization. And we do a lot of collaborating with to see what the best practices of other state HFAs are, which is Housing Finance Agency. So Oregon Housing Community Services is Oregon's HFA. And we learn a lot of things when we go back. We were just back in Washington, D.C., and I think one of the things that we're really learning, and even though it stands to reason, is that collaboration, right? We know that in the lending industry, a lot of lenders think that the real estate agents and realtors should stay in their lane. But I think that what we learn is when we get everybody in a room, that we learn from each other, right? And we elevate, and we can reach out to more people. It's a cross-pollination almost. So what we're encouraging and what we're acting on, we're not just saying do it, we're actually going out and having meetings and forums just like this, where we teach each other. There's no silos, there's no barriers, and there shouldn't be, right? Because again, we can create those relationships. And that's the key is building the relationships. OHCS, quite honestly, our customer is the lender, because we can only buy a closed mortgage loan, right? But the thing is that when we start talking to real estate agents, and even quite honestly, a lot of lenders, they don't even know what OHCS does, right? Oregon Housing, from a lending perspective, again, because I'm the Assistant Director of Homeownership Lending, produces the Flex Lending mortgage loan, which actually couples DPA. Hi, Heidi, it's nice to have you back. And the Oregon Bond Residential Mortgage Loan Program that has a super low rate, or actually offers not down payment assistance, sorry, closing cost assistance with it. So I probably talked way too long, but again, we're encouraging relationship building is really what it boils down to, and educating about what products and services that we can offer that can actually help people become homeowners. Thank you.
Scott, that's great. And where can our members learn more about your programs? Could you post a link in the chat maybe?
Absolutely. We'll post up some stuff right now. Thank you.
Heidi, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Apologies. I'm just having a moment this morning where nothing is working well. So I hope I don't get booted off again.
I hope so too. Could you give us just a quick intro? And what we've been talking about is what tools should realtors have in their toolkit in working with populations who are maybe first time or first generation home buyers? What programs do you offer? What should realtors know?
Absolutely. So I work with the Portland Housing Center. We specialize in home buyer education and helping with down payment assistance programs. So we've been around since, it's been about 31 years now. And we were opened at the request of the city in response to redline practices that were happening. So what we offer are a variety of different down payment assistance programs, because while most people can qualify and pay for some, part of a mortgage, getting the down payment together is incredibly difficult. So we do offer programs that are go to higher income levels for culturally specific sets of people, as well as for everybody. And I honestly think that we need more of that, because that is one of the biggest barriers to get into housing. I also think that everybody needs to benefit from home buyer education and financial counseling. We don't teach any sort of financial counseling in schools anymore. So a lot of people just don't know how to manage their finances. And I think anything we can do to help educate everybody on just basic finances goes a really long way toward helping everyone. And I think all realtors should know about our down payment assistance programs. Some of them are statewide, some of them are city specific. but they can certainly help a lot of your clients that otherwise would not be able to purchase a home.
That is great information. Thank you. And I see Erica posting links in the chat, and I'm hoping she's posting some links to the Heidi's programs as well. Luis, do you want to add anything to this discussion about what tools should realtors have in their toolkit?
Yeah, I think Scott and Heidi have kind of covered that. One thing that I will say is, much like Heidi, we do very similar things in just different areas. But the one thing that always surprises me is whenever I get a call and I hear realtors say, I didn't know about this program, right? Like there's a big disconnect in what's available at the state level and then what realtors can access. And so every time I hear that, I'm like, all right, maybe I'm not doing enough research or outreach, or we're not doing enough to spread the word with our realtors. And then a recent conversation that I had with a veteran realtor was that program is just too hard. There's too many steps, and there's programs that are extremely easy to work with. You know, Scott, your program's amazing when we get funding from you guys. But then there's other ones where the municipal is through the city and they become a little bit harder. And the one thing that I would say is there's a lot of money out there. And then just fight for your client. Like, even if we have to jump multiple hoops to be able to get $25,000, that's $25,000 that's helping towards that closing and getting that client one step closer to it. So just know that there's a lot of programs out there that are very easy and simple, but there's a couple of them that do require a couple of extra steps that might seem like a pain in the butt.
Can I add on to that a little bit? So I think you're right that there is a stigma that these programs are difficult, that they're not going to close on time. We do everything behind the scenes, and there's very little that you have to do extra. There are a few programs, if they're federally funded, that do bring in a little bit additional criteria. But for the majority, you won't even realize what's happening behind the scenes. We're doing our job, we're closing on time, we're getting your buyers the extra money that they need. So I think once you do a couple of them, you will realize that they're not as hard as the perception is.
Oh, I'm going to chime in. This is Scott Shaw again. Wow, this completely underscores the reason that we need to continue to do outreach and meetings like we're having right now, because the more that we can educate, the less there will be that, oh, that is too difficult to do, it's impossible, because you get people to share their stories and talk about the successes that they've had, and it's not as hard and there's not as many obstacles as you think, because we've all seen it where they go, oh, they're not likely to accept that offer because it includes this kind of program, right? So yeah, thank you very much.
That's all great engagement. I'm seeing questions come through. I'm hoping that our members are going to connect with all of you afterwards to take a deeper dive into your programs. So yes, let's keep these connections going. Keeping my eye on the clock here. Let's close it out on a positive note. These are tough times for home ownership right now. Prices, interest rates, not to mention the historical barriers that a lot of groups are facing. Scott, I'm going to start with you. What do you see that gives you hope about the future of home ownership access in Oregon?
You know, what gives me hope is that we've got a governor who understands the current state of housing affairs. The main priorities are combating homelessness. Her executive order is declaring a state of emergency around homelessness, directing state agencies to prioritize reducing homelessness and setting housing production goals, as well as more than $1 billion in the current budget and $500 million more proposed in this legislative session is going to go a long way to meeting these goals. We have an amazing, additionally, we have an amazing network of housing partners. We're talking to some of them right now. And their main purpose is to provide safe and stable housing and support services to help people keep their homes that already have homes. All of us are rowing the boat in the same direction and toward these common goals that none of us are alone in this fight. So, and over the past several years, I've kind of alluded to this, is that OHCS has been laying this groundwork for the modernization of not only the programs for homelessness, but our lending programs. And we're pretty heartened by the widespread support we've received from, well, you can see it in some of the chat here, right? They want to know more. There's a craving for that knowledge. There's a support for that evolution, that modernization. And I think that just nice seeing that everything kind of come into the 21st century. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Heidi, what about you? What gives you hope?
Well, I pretty much agree with everything Scott just said. I also want to say that OHCS has been really good about reaching out, asking us what the needs of the community are and adapting to try to meet those needs. So that's really promising that the group of people we have at a state level is listening to what the community needs and trying to reach those goals.
Wonderful. How about you, Luis? You have a hopeful note for us?
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool and exciting things happening within many of the organizations that are out there, like Heidi's and the one that I work for. You know, I think I'll do a little bit of a plug around the community land trust homes, and these are happening in Portland. In the Portland area, we've got several developments around this. So seeing the new developments coming in is going to play a big role that are targeted specifically towards first-time home buyers or families that are within that affordable income bracket. And so whenever I get excited, whenever I see something, you know, in the headline saying so much money's going towards home ownership, because I know what how that's going to translate. And it's going to translate through these programs that we're talking about that a lot of these families can access. So there is a lot of really good energy and conversations happening behind the scenes that many of the realtors don't see. And so just know, like, these things are taking place. Sometimes it moves a little bit slower, sometimes a little bit quicker. And then, you know, we can put as many programs as we can. Our biggest barrier is always going to be funding. The programs are there, but the funding is what's going to probably make everyone be really frustrated, because it comes in and it goes out very quickly. And if it goes out very quickly, that means we're helping families get into homes, which gives me hope.
That's great. And Luis, someone in the chat is asking for you to mention the developments you were referring to. I don't know if you want to just stick that in the chat. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I'll give my 2 cents from Washington. What's giving me hope? You know, we've identified that we're 5 million units short nationwide, and that's what's driving these home prices up, is that we just don't have enough housing. And housing really hasn't been on the radar for many politicians for a long time, because housing production is complicated, it's expensive. But you're finally starting to see across the country politicians talking about our affordable housing crisis. And when I say affordable housing, I'm not talking about low income housing. I'm talking about starter homes and home ownership and townhouses and condos. And so I'm seeing there's more of a political will across the country, and many states are experimenting and trying new things, and we'll see what works. But there's more of a political will now to build more housing. I'm also seeing in Washington, federal agencies are reacting to some of the parts of our housing finance system, which just don't make sense anymore for folks who may not be a W-2 earner, or you know, acknowledging that credit scores are maybe not the best, most accurate measurement of creditworthiness. And so we've seen the Federal Housing Finance Agency that oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac update its credit scoring model, so that now we're beginning to look at things like positive rental payments and positive utility payments that give us a more accurate view of whether people are going to be able to pay their mortgage on time. So I think there's an acknowledgement that of some of these challenges that we're facing, and there's some political will to do something about it. So I think we're at time. I am going to acknowledge our wonderful panelists and encourage all of our members to reach out and connect with them and learn more about their fabulous work. And with that, I'm going to kick it back over to our host, Ashley.
Thank you, Alexia. Wow. I really do feel more hopeful now after that session. The passion that you guys have for what you do is palpable through the screen. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for all the hard work that you do to make housing more equitable in Oregon. So what a cool session that was. All right, so we are going to have another short break. I did want to mention that anything that's been shared resource-wise or link-wise in the comments will be resent back out to to all of the participants at the end. So don't get too overwhelmed trying to keep track of all of these resources. Like we mentioned in the beginning, we are packing a lot of info in here. But we plan to get that back in front of you. So we are going to take a short break. We will see you at 10 a.m. for a panel moderated by one of our favorite past Oregon Realtors presidents, Jeff Wyron. So that should get you guys thinking even further about fair housing. We'll see you in a couple minutes at 10 a.m. to get started.
All right, well, it's 10 a.m. So I think we're ready to go. My name's Jeff Wyron. I am an immediate past president for Oregon Realtors. I work in the Portland Metro Marketplace. And so we're going to talk about accessibility. There are a few characteristics people immediately think about when we discuss fair housing and being inclusive, but disabilities and access are often left out of that discussion. So we're going to talk about visible and hidden disabilities, and how brokers can update their client scripts and practices to make sure that they're meeting the needs of disabled clients. I'm joined today by Corinne Schramm, who's the supervising attorney of Disability Rights Oregon. Welcome, Corinne. Also, Shanta Patton-Goller, who's the broker and salesperson and national speaker on affordable housing, mental health, housing discrimination, DEI, and more. And last but not least, I'm joined by Stephen Beard, who's a realtor and an accessibility specialist, 2023 Fair Housing Champion of California and co-founder of the California Association of Realtors Differently Abled Affinity Group. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today and taking time to be here with us. We have limited time, so I'm just going to hop right into some questions that we have and hopefully encourage some good discussion. So the first question is, what are some common misconceptions that agents have around serving clients with disability? And so I'm going to start, Corinne, with you and ask if you'll be willing to answer that question for us. You're still muted, unfortunately.
Go to sleep.
There we go.
I would say one of the biggest is that one size fits all. There's a vast array of disabilities and it's a whole big spectrum and everybody has different needs. So it needs to be looked at more on like an individual one-on-one basis. And I think another one would be that the ADA design standards are sufficient. I would say those are more like the bare minimum of what needs to be addressed. So I think those are, in my opinion, are the two biggest.
Good, good. Shanta, how about you?
Good morning, it's Shantae.
Shanta,
I would say from the standpoint of mental health, it almost always comes down to flaky, undecided, slow at responding, or just straight out crazy. So those are typically things that that you'll hear if you've ever decided that a client has been difficult or something like that. It's typically comes from something like that. And I think being able to understand that there is a deeper side to a transaction that is dealing with someone with mental health will definitely make it a little bit easier for everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think as an agent, when I consider this conversation about disability, I think ADA. I don't think about mental health, as readily in my mind as I think we should. So I think it's a valid point. Stephen.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm thrilled to be here. Two things from a realtor perspective. Number one, many sellers agents consciously or unconsciously think that a ramp in front of a house or a roll-in shower or any kind of medical appearance is going to detract from the sales value of their home and even result in a lower appraisal value, where sometimes the opposite is true. And from the buyer perspective, some agents do not see, take a look at a person who is manifesting a physical appearance around cognitive or physical challenge and assumes that they have no money and no resources to ever be a homeowner. Those are two really, I think, misconceptions that are still happening too much.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And so I want to pick up a little bit on your first point about accessibility features that are in a home. And as a listing agent, I do think it's common that listing agents might recommend either removing that feature for marketability. So can you dive in a little bit on that? That question isn't on our list here, but I think it's a great conversation because I do agree with you that I think it is common that listing agents give that advice, and I don't think that that's necessarily the right advice to give.
Yeah, I mean, I find it's tragic because we have such, at least where I sell, which is in an urbanized, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so a very built up community, not a ton of brand new housing except condo stock. And the when I see single family homes that have accessibility features, having those removed so that they become more sellable, it's disappointing because there's so little accessible housing stock out there and available that it just makes it even worse for potential home buyers who need some of those features. And I think that there are arguments on both sides. I don't think it's an actually black and white issue at all. I think, like, I had a situation where I had a client who had a ramp that took up half of the driveway space. It was not attractively done. It was done as a utilitarian thing, and it took away features and usage of the property that were also equally important. So I had this agonizing situation where, as an accessibility specialist realtor, the idea of taking out the ramp was anathema to me, and we needed to do it. So I think it's a little gray, but I also think that far too often these things are not considered in the full context of the buyer pool for the home and who could really benefit from these features.
Particularly in like an aging population, and where we're looking at families who are, maybe a younger family, but they're taking care of an older family member who's not going to be able to navigate stairs and or steps into a shower and will need these accessibility features.
I think that's a very good point. Shantae, you're a broker and salesperson as well. What's your feeling on this?
I understand the necessity of it, but I do think there's a misconception that it takes away. It's like once it's put in, it's this particular house for this particular person. And unfortunately, I think that's a big misconception in the community.
Yeah, I think it's, everything requires context, right? And so to your point, Stephen, you hate to give the advice of you might have to remove a feature that could bring somebody some benefit, but if it's poorly done and not a good improvement, even though it might be a beneficial improvement, you're always giving that advice to your client to say, if you did a horrible bathroom remodel, well, you might need to redo that in the same way as if you did a bad job of putting in the ramp. Or, if you didn't put in the ramp properly, right? And the ramp is there, but it's not actually graded properly, so very few people can realistically use it. So I think that those are all factors. Let's go on to the next question. So people are often afraid to talk about these things. And what are some questions that agents could add to their script, or things they should say to their clients to ensure they're being inclusive and really addressing this issue? And I'll start with you, Shantae.
So mental illness gets a little bit tricky. And it truly is, a silent disability, if we want to call it that. Some of the things that I do to make it a little bit easier is I start with what we all should be doing, which is communication style. Right. But I'm asking it because I'm trying to ascertain what their stress level is and what their triggers are. Right. Because if having to make a decision right now causes them to step 20 feet back, then I need to know how to handle that, but not to put them in their own little category where they feel as if they're being treated differently. Right. So for example, I will typically say, hey, I understand that, I have different type of buyers. So let me give you some examples and you let me know which one would fit directly with you. I have buyers who want to only speak on the phone for every transaction, right? I have the buyers who only want to have text messaging, and then I have the ones in the middle. They don't prefer one way or the other. Either is fine. But I take it one step further. As we're moving forward in the timelines, some of them are really tight. So do you think that you would need additional time? And if so, would it help if I prepped you ahead of time, for these different delays or, time frames that you can prepare for those? And typically the way that I do that is through video. So I'll say, because if I can start to get an idea that like this is going to be very stressful for them. And this works with any client, right? But specifically those with mental illness. I'm not asking them what they have or any of those things, right? Because that would get you in a sticky position. But I am asking specific questions that would allow me to see if that's the case. And then you might say, Shantae, how do you know that? Because I have mental illness. Every sibling, uncle, and aunt in my family has mental illness. So I've lived with it and I understand what that looks like. So I'm actually looking for things that would potentially trigger me, right? But what I end up doing is if there's someone who says, yeah, I need to know ahead of time, you know, as much as possible, then I make a series of videos, 60 seconds, right? They can replay it all they want. And I can say next week, here are the things that we're going to have to make decisions on. And I send it. So if it's like, I know our due diligence, you know, we got in contract today, you know, earnest money, that sort of thing, I would have already prepped them for that prior to making the offer, right? But moving forward, here are the timelines. I start sending 60-second videos on, okay, so next week, you know, about Thursday, we will need to make you know, make a decision on if there's repairs, you know, and what those are. Within the next, you know, 5 days, you're going to get the homeowners association package. I don't know if you're somebody who needs to read the whole thing, you know, but if you are, understand that we have 5 days, you know, to respond to that. So I'm literally slowing down and I'm focusing on the timeframes and I'm telling them up front what to expect to help to minimize the issue later on of them feeling rushed or them actually getting into a downward spiral and they aren't in a functioning state that week. I can at least try to get in front of those.
That's great advice. Fantastic. Stephen, you want to add anything to that?
Well, first of all, Shantae, it's amazing. It's great to see you again. I
Same.
love what you're saying. What I want to add is it is so important for us as realtors in that buyer consultation or when we're talking to the seller is to get out of our own head around assumptions and built-in prejudice that we have and become from curiosity and ask questions in a non-judgy way, not why, but how do you manage in the kitchen? How do you manage in the bathroom? What kind of things are important to you around transportation? What kind of things are important to you around how you use the backyard of a house or how you are going to have a lifestyle in the home? And the more we don't make assumptions about that and ask questions, I think the better the result we will have in that dialogue. And I think that goes far beyond accessibility type issues too. It goes to every way that we can do a good job of serving our clients.
Yeah, I agree. Corinne?
I don't really have anything to add. I was basically going to say a lot of what Stephen said. And I think that Shantae, she nailed it with the mental health stuff.
Can I hop in, Jeff?
Yeah, please.
Here's just a quick story or situation where I did the opposite of what Stephen's talking about. And it cost me a client. And so I had a referral for clients who were moving to Las Vegas. And at that time, my assumption is when I saw them, they seemed to be very healthy, fit, you know, people. But she did mention to me that she wanted to have a clear pathway from the parking lot, because we were looking about townhomes, from the parking lot to the front door, right? And so I was like, oh, okay, great, you know, so I would take, you know, pictures of things, but I also in the back of my head am like, they're purchasing a 2-story home, you know, they don't have visibly any type of disabilities that I could see, right? And that was the opposite. So they were living out of state. I was there taking video of everything like I normally do for my out-of-state people. And what I did not notice is there was one step, just one step up from the parking lot. You walked a little bit, one step up, that's it. I didn't notice that. And so when they got here, there was that one step right there. And she was really angry, right? And so I was like, but I looked at this, you know, and this and all these different things. And so one of the biggest mistakes I made is I said, well, you didn't tell me, you know, that this step was going to be a problem. Like, you didn't tell me, you know, and her response to you didn't tell me made her feel like I was saying, you didn't tell me there was a disability. And she's like, I didn't have to tell you, you know, you should have been paying attention because I said I needed a clear, you know, pathway and everything. And that was totally my fault. But in my mind, I couldn't fathom that this one step would make a difference, because we have literally been going up and down houses while they were here in town. So I wouldn't have thought of it being a big deal. But what I did not know is the man, who was very physically fit, ex-military, had a medical condition where he could be perfectly fine to walk, and then there would be days where he couldn't walk at all. And that's why they wanted the bedroom downstairs, but they never said, they almost made it seem like the bedroom downstairs was for entertainment or something, right? But because they didn't give me clues, I used that as a reason why I didn't do my job correctly, right? But they didn't have to tell me what it was for. They didn't have to tell me that they can't have not even one little step. They didn't have to tell me those things, but I made an assumption, and it cost them their earnest money, because it was the last minute cancel, right? So it cost them their earnest money because the builder wouldn't give it back to them. And it cost me a client too, because of that one step and my assumption into what they looked like, as opposed to understanding what their hardship was throughout their time. So don't do what Shantae did.
Hey, we're all guilty of doing stuff like that. And so the two big takeaways, great responses to this question, and boiling this down to the really practical about what an agent can do. And it's so funny that oftentimes things that an agent can do to help in specific circumstances are just good business practices in general for them, right? So a buyer consultation where you ask some of the questions that Stephen highlighted. How are you going to use the kitchen? What are your specific needs for the property? And I think as agents, when we do a buyer consultation, we're always moving so fast. It's how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, you want a single story or a 2-story or whatever, right? We're hitting the top of the funnel, and we're not diving deeply enough into some of those great questions. How are you going to use the kitchen? Are there any specific rooms that are very important to you? Or, you know, how are you going to use the property? And I think that those are great questions. And Shantae, the use of video, I've been selling real estate 19 years. And 19 years ago, people were saying video is what it's all about, right? And I still do training classes where I ask for a show of hands of how many people are actually using video. And it's 10 to 25% tops. And that just blows me away. So I think that very practical advice that you offered about setting up, you know, just quick little video clips. And all of us have, if you have an iPhone, you can do video, right? I mean, we all have the capability now to do it. So setting up quick little video clips to help kind of frame the expectations moving forward, week by week, even one when you start that interaction with that client. I think those are incredibly valuable and practical tips. Thank you for sharing those. Moving on to the next question. What do you think are the most overlooked accessibility features of a home typically? And I'll just throw it out there for anybody who wants to respond to that.
So from the point of view of physical features, I think that kitchens and kitchen usage is often overlooked. You know, everyone thinks about ramps and grab bars and, you know, thresholds. And those are all extremely important. But from the point of view of how is someone going to use a kitchen, I work with clients for whom standard countertop size is inadequate. It doesn't work. Or for whom getting into cabinets can be awful in most modern kitchens, which are not designed for universally. Our construction methodologies are just not designed with consideration of differently abled people. And so that's one that I observe.
Yeah, very valid. And I see a comment about turnaround space and bathrooms as well, which I fully agree with. Shantae or Corinne, do you have anything to add there?
You know, I feel like it's, it's such a case by case basis that it's hard to say. I mean, I do know that like handheld shower, those are important. And I don't think that many people realize that. But also like turning radius carpets, the height of a carpet.
Yep.
I would say don't underestimate someone who focuses on bright rooms or the direction of sunlight. It might not seem like a big deal, but even as I am looking for houses, and I sell my house like every 2-3 years, if I can't get enough sunlight into this house, I won't buy the house, because sunlight is pivotal to my mental health, especially if I am in a mental health crisis or if I'm on a downward spiral. The sunlight could be the best thing for me. So as someone who's constantly focusing on the light, don't just think they like bright rooms. It could be one of their, ways to stay healthy.
Yeah, good. Fully agree with that. We know, I mean, I work in the Portland metro area market, and our MLS was one of the first, if not the first MLS to include accessibility features on the platform, that the agents could highlight accessibility features. How do you think, what are the ways that agents can help their clients find accessibility features on the main portals that they're searching on? Is there a way for a consumer to be able to really kind of look through any of the portals and see specific accessibility features?
I'm involved in a small way with some changes happening in and around the standards for MLSs in California by the California Association of Realtors. And it is so hard because you've got two issues. Number one, as Corinne has correctly pointed out, every situation is unique, every person is unique, and every accessibility need, both physical and cognitive, are different. So that's one challenge with, online searches, whether it's through an MLS or a portal, a third-party portal. But the other issue, and this was raised in the chat, is that agents who are less educated in this realm may not have a clear understanding of what it is they're being asked to evaluate on the MLS, so that they might write something as having a certain accessibility component when in fact it doesn't, according to others, and for some group of buyers who would need that feature. So it's a problem.
Corinne, do you have some insight on that? No?
I just wanted to add, because I see the chat and they talk about lock boxes being on the side. And I don't know, you guys don't have this issue probably here, but here our yards are rock, right? And we pay a lot of money for that rock. But when you have to go on the side of the house, you're tripping and everything. But I'll take this one step further, and it's not inclusive to this situation. But within the Black community, one thing that you can do to protect us and keep us safe is to ensure that you do not put your lock boxes on the side of the house, because especially when it gets dark, there's already a bias that says we're trying to break in. And so it can be dangerous to our lives for you to put a lock box on the side of the house. So please just keep that in mind, not only just for the accessibility, but it's a great way for you to be a good ally and try to keep us as safe as possible.
That's an incredibly valuable point. I appreciate you making it. We don't have a lot of rock here, but we have a lot of mud. And that's a problem too, when people are trying to get to a side yard. But I appreciate you bringing up the point. It is 10:25, and so that's our hard stop. I want to make one point. The last question was, what do you think are the easiest and most impactful changes brokers can make, or tools they could add to their toolkit to be more inclusive? And I'm going to answer that question for us collectively in what I've heard you say, which is we need to consult with our clients and listen closely, that their limitations are as unique as they are as people, and it's never one size fits all. But boy, if we have that buyer consultation and we just listen and we guide the conversation with some of those great questions that you've all illustrated, you're going to A, be a better realtor in general, and B, you're going to be way better able to serve clients that do have a physical or mental disability. So I think that's all the time we have. Thank you all so much. I wish we had more time to talk. What a valuable 25 minutes and great content from all of you. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having.
Wow.
Wake
That
up.
was awesome. Thank you, Jeff, so much for moderating that really rich conversation. I have taken lots of different diversity and fair housing trainings, and I can't say that I've gotten the opportunity to tune into something like that before. So I took lots of notes and am even more inspired than I was before our last session. So guys, we are at almost 10:30. Our next panel will begin at 10:30. We've spent the first half, before I move on, let me thank once again, Jeff, Corinne, Shantae, and Stephen. Very inspired also by your contributions today. We've spent the first half of our day talking about getting folks into homeownership, but what about helping clients keep their homes? We are going to tackle that next, and we will see you at 10:30 after our quick little break. We'd love to hear what tools you're adding to your toolkit or ways that you're updating your client intake process in the chat. So let us know.
Real estate professionals, you are at the very heart of a great American dream. You prove it every hour of every day. No one is better qualified, more trusted, or works harder to help buyers and sellers make the biggest financial decision of their lives. This is something every American needs to know, and we will work with you to make sure they do. Realtor.com.
Hi, Molly.
Hi.
You can go ahead and kick us off.
Great. Okay, awesome. So welcome back from the break. I hope everybody's enjoying what we're learning so far. Such interesting content for us to do better. My name is Molly Mayer. I am the Vice Chair of the Diversity Key Committee, and it's my honor to host this panel today. And we are looking at the unforeseen costs of home ownership. So I have some awesome people here that we're going to talk with. And we know that home ownership is a fundamental element in improving quality of life, generational wealth building, and sustaining healthy communities. But often folks feel pressure to purchase a home without the financial reserves to handle the unforeseen and expensive costs that can spring up, like needing a new roof, having to replace a sewer line, and so on. So we want to chat about how we can support lower income clients with navigating these hurdles of home ownership. I want to say that this isn't only about first-time home buyers. It could be folks who maybe haven't bought a house in a while and kind of need to like refresh themselves on the process. So I would like our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves, starting with Sonia.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm Sonia Capece. I'm the Housing Director in Enable Impact, which is located in Central Oregon.
Great, thank you. And Christy?
Good morning. I'm Christy Lavelle with Cross Country Mortgage here in Eugene. I am having my loan partner join us as well. He's a wealth of knowledge, and John Leach.
Great, thank you. So the way I'd like this panel to go is taking a look at the purchase process, pre, during, and post, and kind of look at the resources that are available to buyers. So whoever wants to start first as what type of resources are available pre-purchase?
Christy and I what we notice a lot with clients is that having a budget is really the kind of the cornerstone of whether or not they're going to be set up for success. Okay, so even when we can qualify people for home loans, a lot of times they don't. They might qualify for actually more than they can actually afford. So we really stress to them to look at what have you been saving, what is your budget look like. And then it's not just a matter of rent versus that new payment. We want to make sure that there's line items in that budget for home maintenance, and things that they can start, preparing for. So I think that that's kind of the key. We started last year teaching a budget class, just, for free, doing a Zoom class, because I think lending guidelines, down payment assistance programs or everything is great, but having success is what we're looking for. We don't want to put somebody into a worse situation. And being, super old and being in this industry for a long time, I had to deal with a lot of clients losing their homes in 2008 through 2011. And a lot of that just really became down because they bought more house than they could afford. So I think we really like to look at that budget, up front and really encourage, let's get them into a successful situation, because it all looks good with the appreciation of homes and the buildup of equity. But if you can't really afford that monthly payment, then it really can kind of push you to too much stress, and maybe sometimes waiting is your best option.
Definitely. I always like to common refrain, just because you can doesn't mean you should. We have had some panelist changes, and I'd like to welcome Scott. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Scott Shaw, Assistant Director of Homeownership Lending for Oregon Housing Community Services, Oregon's Housing Finance Agency, or HFA. And Molly, I'd say that to my teenagers. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So that was awesome. That was flat awesome. So nice.
And so we did have a panelist, Alicia, and she wasn't able to join us. So I think you're stepping in for her.
I am.
Fantastic. Okay, Sonia, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, so two things. One, I would definitely agree with what it was said. And also for some of the realtors that are in the conference that maybe they are not offering that class, just a reminder that there are housing centers like Enable Impact throughout the state. And each housing center offers a couple of key classes that are gonna help your buyers to be successful home buyers and also successful homeowners, right? So we have the home buyer course that every housing center has. There's financial educations that really go about that credit piece and a budget for life, not just for the purchase, right? And then many of them also offer like a post-purchase class that really talks about the importance of maintenance. How do you budget for that maintenance? How do you understand your insurance and your options regarding insurance? And if your buyer is not near one of the multiple housing centers that are throughout the state, there is self-paced courses that cover these topics as well. eHome America frameworks are two of the national products that exist that will help your buyer be better prepared to be a home buyer and a homeowner.
Fantastic. Thank you. Scott, do you have anything to add in on this one?
There we go. Sorry, I had to find the mute button. Just to lay the groundwork for everybody that's here is it so OHCS kind of want to lay the groundwork for what we are. We're not a direct service provider. What we do is we support the service provider, and basically what we do is we set the guideline and the framework to help attain basically the goals of not only our governor but the state of Oregon for low to median income Oregonians. And exactly what Sonia and Chrissy are saying is that the path to homeownership, it starts with education, and that's why we fund 15 homeownership centers across the state, people that are groups that are embedded in the community and know what those needs are and can meet those needs. And I think just the idea of being able to educate people not only pre-purchase but post-purchase and be able to assist. Right. In fact, our lending programs require that you go to one of our homeownership centers in order to get the home buyer education and get that certificate. And the idea is to lay the groundwork so that there is a relationship that's already established, so that once you buy a home, if there is a problem, you have a relationship established with somebody to help you through the process to make sure that you keep your home. So thank you.
I love it. And there was the earlier panel that kind of talked about the need for budgeting and personal finance and how we're just lacking that. So we are going to have all these resources shared out at the end of today's summit. And there's, just so much coming at us. And so we want to make sure that all the realtors joining us can put this into their toolkit. And actually, I just learned from Sonia about the post-purchase class, and it's $50 and it's do it on your own time. It's fantastic. I have clients right now who I'd love to take that class. So that was kind of like a pre-purchase. Now we're in the deal. We got our offer accepted. Tell me, what are the best things we should be doing?
Well, I think part of that, after you've gone through the budgeting part, is knowing what your costs are. And I know that there was a question about the hidden cost going into it. And I think people they think mainly just down payment is the main thing, cash that they have to have. But there's also closing costs and prepaids and other fees that are appraisal fees, your home inspection fee. So I think just really making sure that the borrower and the client buyers are aware of those and it's very clear to them. And that's really important. Communication and making sure they're in the know and feel comfortable with knowing what they're going into.
Yeah, and to that I would add also understanding kind of what community resources they may exist to help them with that, right? And there's different down payment programs that exist throughout the state that sometimes they have funding and sometimes they don't, and they change, and different lenders offer different products as well. But really understanding, because potentially you had this money set aside for down payment, you forgot about the closing costs, but you may be able to find something that helps you with your down payment to afford some of that closing cost.
So on the realtor side, I'd like to add, we're always going to have the inspection. Sure, we got crazy and people wanted to waive them for a second there, but that's not doing our best for our clients, our clients knowing exactly what's coming at them. And I think that's something that we should add to our scripts about speaking to all these costs that are very clear and laid out, because there's no fun when your clients get surprised and then it's a stressful situation. So I would say inspections of all sorts. I kind of come from the side of the more eyes on the property, the better, because we want to make sure that the buyer knows as much as possible. There's always surprises, but it's a horrible phone call to get after you've closed and something major has broken or it's a huge expense coming at them. Okay, great. So let's see. Post-purchase, anybody have anything about post-purchasing that we could be doing better?
I guess I'll get us started on this one. I think that when it comes to the hidden cost of maintaining that house, one of the first questions that people should really look at is, was this kind of short-term setback, or has something changed on their whole financial and family potentially picture that really looks, you have to look at kind of a more long-term solution, right? And so many times I think it is the realtors who will get that first call and be like, hey, I don't know how to pay for my roof, right? And it's not just potentially a referral to, these are the 5 roofers, but I think it opens the opportunity to have a conversation with your client on, okay, what else is going on in your life? And you may discover that, well, maybe somebody was supposed to be doing the roof repair because they knew how to do it, and that's what they had thought when they bought the house, but then maybe that person is no longer part of the household, or they has changed professions, or all kinds of things could happen. So I think looking at first that aspect is key. And then there's some actual resources that we see people use when it comes to the actual cost, but it starts with looking at the big picture.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think on the lender side, it's really hard after, and I think we would all agree that after the transaction, the resources are less available than prior. And so I think really looking at that picture of, like we talked about the budget, and so the home inspection comes back, and let's say the roof in realtor and lender terms is fine because it has a 5-year or more life expectancy. But what's the plan then for the client 5 to 10 years when we're actually going to need that roof replaced? And I bring up roofs because I think, like all of us, the cost of them right now is just crazy. But and like in reality, because my daughter's getting ready to buy a house, and it's like, if you need a new roof, even in the next 10 years, how are you going to save up $30,000, for that? So having that, try to just get more of these in the before part than the after. And I think, and I guess the only thing I can really think of is after is hopefully you've built up some equity, and maybe we can tap into some of that equity to pull that back out to pay for those costs, down the road. So
yeah. And some other examples of resources that we see people using when it's kind of like a one-time expense is, for one, there are a lot of community lending programs throughout the state. And when it comes to health and safety, then many lower income home buyers can have access to those products. And again, funding kind of comes and goes, and the partnership with the state on those ones is crucial, right? But those are programs exist throughout the state. Also, Oregon has the individual development account, and in many cases, one of the possible uses for that program is home repairs. So a lot of people know about it for the down payment side, but it's also one of the eligible uses, the home repairs. It kind of depends on how it's that program offered in your community, whether that's available and open, right? And what we're starting to see more is that some of the affordable housing developers are having programs for that safety-related home repair that you don't have to have purchased the home through them, because they're really about affordable home ownership for the communities. And that means maintaining that homeownership for somebody that already has it. So through the programs Healthy Homes, I'm starting to see that more communities have programs that maybe a couple of years ago even they didn't have.
Thank you.
That's good. I didn't know some of those.
So I think we are having a robust chat, and I would like to kind of talk about some of the messages that are coming in from realtors who are participating today. And one of the things that we were going to touch on, which are the net sheets that we should be providing as a best practice to our clients. Here are the costs. This is what's going to come at you. And I feel like we should be providing a net sheet for every listing appointment we go to, because I think sometimes, you know, people might be caught in a situation where they're going to be underwater on their house. And what can we do? Maybe it doesn't work to sell their house. And we had heard there's going to be this wave of foreclosures, which I'm not seeing. I don't know if anybody else is seeing right now. So I think that's good for our buyers and good for our sellers, that nobody's being forced to leave their homes. But another thing that's come up in the webinar chat is home warranties. And I think these are such a valuable tool that we can be offering and providing for our clients. I offer them for every buyer across the board. You're not going to get a cute basket from me, but you're going to get a home warranty for a year. Like you know, your hot water heater goes out, any of your major systems. That's something that we should be telling our clients, this is available to you. Think about it. We should be writing it into our offers and see if the sellers can pay. It's a for what it could provide, it is a pretty affordable price if anything goes wrong. So I think that was some good comments. And anybody have anything to add post-purchase, like as far as like lending, if you're seeing your clients get underwater, are there any ways that we can guide them or help them?
Well, yes. I think it's mostly just being able to, once we know that they're in that situation, dealing with the servicer. There's lots of programs, I know, with Cross Country, and there may be an option to modify the loan. I mean, the servicer is going to want to work with that client to help them get caught up. Outside of just the lending area, there are a million different opportunities for them to get some counseling through like foreclosure counseling. I think there was a couple of websites that I may have sent a link for, but just to get some outside, a third party perspective on things and help them go through that process. But I know servicing is where they should start, and usually should get quite a bit of support through that.
Fantastic. And Scott, you put something in the chat.
Yeah, so I am not the subject matter expert because I'm filling in. So forgive me, I'm throwing in, like, I've got a link for OHCS's Restore Health and Safety, which Sonia spoke to. And then we've got mortgage payment help, which actually this dovetails in perfectly. It's forbearance resources, the homeowners assistance fund, foreclosure avoidance, et cetera. But again, a lot of this is in partnership with our homeownership centers. But again, I love this meeting that we're having today because it is this holistic approach where we are all working together towards that same goal of not only getting people into home ownership, but also helping them retain their home. So thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and what I would add, Molly, to that is first, I really want to highlight that importance of that home warranty, right? A lot of times when we see people that they just bought their home and they come back to the housing center for assistance, that they are like worried about being able to make the payment, it usually has to do with one of those kind of unforeseen expenses that happen really early on before they really had the time to replenish their savings accounts, right? Because they put a lot of it towards that closing. So I really want to make another plug for that because it could be really life-changing, right? And then later on, as they stay in their home and something happens, the importance of being proactive. There are programs that can help with foreclosure prevention, and those programs change a lot. And you have to feed a very sometimes narrow parameters, right? And a lot of it is driven by federal funding. So what is open today, when what was open yesterday may change, and who knows what we'll have tomorrow, right? But that importance of being proactive. And I think that, again, a lot of the realtors that I see in the industry really focus on creating a relationship for life with their clients, right? They are, you're hoping not to help them just with that one purchase, but to get their friends and family referrals, and to get, when they are ready to change their house, that they'll remember you. And so sometimes if you are doing a good job on establishing that, you may be one of those people that really hears like, oh, I'm struggling, right? So remember that there are, you're not the expert on the foreclosure side, but there are housing centers, there are foreclosure specialists throughout the state, and they can be, sometimes they'll really thank you for knowing where they should go. You don't have to have all the answers, but who do you connect them with?
Yeah, thank you. Good point. So as realtors, pre-purchase, we're going to help them receive coaching and education about their budgeting. And then during the process, it is our job to help them learn as much as possible about the property. And it's not about us, it's about them and setting them up for success. And then post-purchase, how can we help? What can we do? How can we remain a resource for them? And I think like our goal here, well, my goal is to help elevate our profession so that we're here not just to make the sale, but we're here to help people with their home ownership journey. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been very interesting. I hope folks have pulled out information, and I look forward to sending out the resources. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to these folks. They're very knowledgeable and here to help us all. So thank you, and have a good rest of your summit.
All right. Thanks, Molly. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, those that participated on that last panel. My gears are spinning. I'm sure you guys are right there with me. Lots of great information. We have time now for another little break. So our next panel starts at 11. In the chat, if you would like to take a moment, we'd love to hear what surprised you the most from this last session. I've really enjoyed peeking at the chat, hearing what has kind of been the aha moments for our attendees today. So take some time to connect in there. For the last hour, when we get back at 11, we're going to really zero in on fair housing. So do you know how to support your clients if they experience discrimination or fair housing violations? We're going to be joined by Commissioner Strode, and he is going to chat with our next panelist all about this. So we will see you guys back here at 11. All right, we are back for our 11 a.m. session. I have the honor now of introducing past president of Oregon Realtors and director of the Oregon Real Estate Agency since 2019, Commissioner Steve Strode is joining us today to moderate our next panel, where we will be focusing on how to identify and report fair housing and ethics violations. So passing it over to you, Steve.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Oregon Realtors, for the invite today. So the 2019 documentary, Long Island Divided, produced by Newsweek, shed light on a topic that the industry had been somewhat reluctant to acknowledge, that fair housing violations are still happening. Subsequently, NAR's Fair Haven course has taught many realtors about violations they may not even have realized they were committing. So, but what happens when you or a client witness a fair housing violation? We're a self-reporting industry, so it's critical that real estate licensees know how to identify and report fair housing and ethics violations. And we're excited to talk to folks today who are administering these reporting mechanisms and to learn from them. So I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. We have Diane Mosley, Director of Training and Policy Resources at NAR. Ibrahim Coulibaly, Lead Civil Rights Investigator, Fair Housing Enforcement at BOLI. BOLI is the Bureau of Labor and Industry. And Shaila Reuter, Education and Outreach Director at Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So welcome, everyone. So my first question is, how about just a brief overview of your work? So what reporting mechanism do you represent? And why should a real estate licensee go to you? And what should they expect if they do so? How about if we start with Ibrahim first?
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for having me today. My name is Ibrahim Coulibaly. I work for the Bureau of Labor and Industries. For those of you who don't know, BOLI protects Oregonian rights around employment, also housing and public accommodation. So we protect those rights for Oregonians to be free of discrimination based on their protected class. And the protected classes we have in Oregon, we have disability, family status, gender, marital status, national origin, race, religion, sexual orientation. So all of those protected classes, if they are considered to discriminate against someone's right, such as refusing to sell, make a distinction in prices, discourage the person from buying, or advertise differently. When all of those come to place because of the person protected class, because of one of the protected classes I just talked about, then you can contact BOLI. That's what we investigate in fair housing. No, that's the question that so I cannot take question right now.
Okay, thank you. Shaila, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd love to. And Ibrahim, it's really good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. So the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, we act as not only a reporting organization where somebody can contact us if they believe that they've witnessed housing discrimination happening. That's, certainly one of our functions. We have a hotline. Realtors could contact us, say, hey, I witnessed this situation. What can we do about it? That's one branch of what we do, but also another branch of what we do is education. So realtors can actually reach out to us and use us as a resource. So if you witnessed something, if you're thinking like that may have been discrimination, that may not, I want to get more information about what discrimination might look like in the home buying process. We have a housing provider hotline where realtors can actually contact us and talk to an education outreach worker that specifically works with housing providers that are wanting more information about housing discrimination. Now, certainly if you think you've witnessed housing discrimination, you can contact also our hotline. Couple different ways to do that. We do have live phone hours Wednesdays and Friday mornings. And then we also have online reporting forms as well at our website, fhco.org, and basically talk to us about what it is that you witnessed, what protected class you think that actually was in violation of. Ibrahim did a great job of listing out those protected classes. What was the incident? Who was involved? What was the effect that this incident had? Also very important to note that. And then also really important if you're reporting to BOLI with Ibrahim or with our organization to have any type of like a record or a paper trail, even if it's just you writing down date, time, who's involved, just to create some kind of a written record, because that helps when an organization like ours or like BOLI needs to move on and actually do an investigation to see if we have a bona fide claim of housing discrimination.
Great. Thank you. Diane, go ahead, please.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the invite. So the National Association does not actually process complaints with respect to discrimination. We do, our board of directors, establish the 17 articles in our Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, which is nationwide, but that Code of Ethics is enforced locally. So it's our Article 10, and the classes, our 9 protected classes are our Article 10 of the Code of Ethics says realtors shall not deny equal professional services to any person for reasons of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Those are our 9. And additionally, realtors in their employment practices, and that includes independent contractors as well, cannot discriminate with respect to, I'll say, employment. I know independent contractors aren't employees, but they cannot discriminate with respect to how they treat those that work for them at a brokerage as well. So we don't typically field those calls. Certainly they sometimes do reach to us, but then we refer them to the local associations. And in Oregon, I talked to Kelly Barker, your professional standards staff, and she relayed that of the 23 local associations there in Oregon, 17 of them have opted on to the statewide program. So if someone were to want to file an Article 10 violation, they would reach directly to Kelly or someone else on Oregon staff, unless it was related to the 6. There's only there's 23 total, but only 17 associations actually adopted or opted in to the statewide program. There are 6 that do not have their professional standards processed by the state association. So if someone were to want to file a complaint and the alleged offender was a member of the Portland Association, Rogue Valley, Klamath County, Clatsop, Lincoln County, or Tillamook County, they would go to those associations' websites. There's information on those 6. There's 6 that enforce the code themselves locally.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. The next I know we're interested in, because we may hear about violations or hear about complaints, but not necessarily outcomes. So if you all could share, what are the outcomes or enforcements that you're finding in violation from complaints you receive? Charlie, you want to go first?
Sure, certainly. So basically outcomes of complaints can really vary on what the type of complaint is. One of the things that we find is that if there's a fair housing violation and the housing provider is really basically understands that there's been a violation and is interested in being educated, is interested in changing their business practices so that no longer happens, you know, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes it may be that the result is education. It may be education, and there may also be a fine. And then in more significant situations, we'll see harsher penalties that are instilled that may actually change their business practice, ability to practice business, things like that. So it really depends. And it also depends on which level. So is it something that we can resolve at an advocacy level where we're just educating? Or is it something that we have to move to file a complaint with HUD or BOLI? People have up to a year to file a complaint with HUD or BOLI if there's been housing discrimination, or they have up to 2 years to actually work with an attorney to go through the court systems instead. So, so I would say in general, really good idea just to keep records for at least a couple years from a fair housing standpoint.
Great. All right, thank you. Ibrahim?
Thank you. BOLI is unique in the way that we have the investigators, the prosecutors, and the judges in the same building. Next to my office is the prosecutor. On the other side, I have a judge. So the complaint here, we don't dismiss them. We try to have a conciliation. Because as you know, when people file complaints, because sometimes you have a lot of emotions and business decisions too. So we try to go through the conciliation process. If that doesn't work and the complaint, we find that we have substantial evidence to move the complaint to the administrative prosecution unit, we do it. So the prosecutors will also try to settle the case. We always invite the parties to try to find a common ground, and we close the case at no fault. But if there is no agreement, we move it to the court. So we have the administrative law judges here. We have a court here within our office here in Portland, and we go there. And it goes anywhere from the last mediation I had about 2 weeks ago. I think the complainant got $15,000. I've been in mediation where complainant walk away with $150,000. But the judge, if it goes to the court, the judge will find a decision maker.
Great, thank you. And just on a side note, because I'm from the Oregon Real Estate Agency, we're not the primary mechanism for these types of complaints, but we have asked that if a violation is found against a licensee, that BOLI would forward that outcome to us too, so we could see if a licensing violation has also occurred. So that's a practice that we have. We met with some BOLI staff a couple of years ago just to make sure that again, if licensees are involved in this behavior, we rely on other organizations like Shiles and Ibrahim's to do the investigation, but we could have some follow-up if they're named as the complainant, and we could open an investigation as well. Diane, do you have anything to add?
I do. Our system, much like we have a statute of limitations, so to speak, a time frame that someone must submit, and that's 180 days from the time the complainant knew or could have known in the exercise of reasonable diligence, or 180 days after the conclusion of the transaction or event, whichever is later. So our window is a little bit shorter, but the consequences for our board of directors, which is comprised of approximately 1,000 people, have differentiated. There's 17 articles in the Code of Ethics, and not all of them rise to egregious discipline if found in violation, right? Context matters. They have said that violations of the public trust, which we define as fraud, discrimination, or misappropriation of client or customer funds or property, are sufficiently egregious and should be treated accordingly. So we have about, 10 or 12 different types of discipline that can be instituted if someone is found in violation, let's say, of Article 10. And the most severe sanctions, the least severe would be a letter of reprimand and warning, and they can be, chosen a la carte. Education, of course, a fine up to $15,000, and they can have their MLS access and use suspended or terminated in some instances, and additionally, their membership. The Realtor Family is a voluntary trade association where people step above and beyond the minimal licensing law requirements, right? And they agree to be a realtor. And what that means is they agree to abide by that code of ethics. They're a member of the National Association. So they can be terminated or suspended from board membership as well. And if the board of directors believes it is a violation of the public trust, they're obligated to make the referral to the regulatory body if it relates to real estate related activities and transactions for the regulatory body to determine whether or not they wish to take any action.
Thank you. That shows the partnership as well, too. You have an obligation to report. Because again, for the most egregious violations, those are, you know, bad actors that we don't necessarily want in the business. But also it's important to reiterate, as you've all mentioned, we take an education first approach when it's a minor violation. The idea is to educate and improve before sanctioning. So I'm glad you all mentioned that in your answers. So the next question, and this applies, I know, with complaints to our agency as well. It seems like there's sometimes a fear that the systems could be abused through wrongful reporting. And in your experience, do you see that happening? What is your experience? Diane, how about if you start with that as well?
So with any of the articles in the Code of Ethics, certainly there are situations where no violations are found, right? And I've heard the phrase, oh, you're weaponizing the Code of Ethics, right? So it's just like a court, right? Anybody can go in and file a specious, you know, case in court or in any organization. But one of the things that I think, helped our membership understand when we instituted, and I think it was 1974, our Article 10, it wasn't Article 10 at that time, is that there is a process that you have to defend yourself. So you have a full and fair opportunity to defend yourself. And if someone were to bring a specious complaint, it perhaps wouldn't even get out of the grievance committee. And then number two, if it did get out of the grievance committee, then you have a group of 5 or 3, depends on the association's policy, who will sit and review and make a determination as to whether or not the code was violated and what the appropriate consequences should be. Mm-hmm.
Who wants to go next? Shai or Ibrahim?
Happy to go next. So one of the things that I'll say is, you know, the national statistic is that only 1 in 10 acts of discrimination ever get reported. And the reality is when we look within certain populations, it's even a larger number of incidents of housing discrimination that don't get reported. So in my previous life before the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, I worked with people living with HIV and AIDS. And my guess is it was more like probably 1 in 20 acts of housing discrimination got reported. We would see similar statistics if we look at communities of color, certain religions, LGBTQIA+ folks as well, because, you know, it's not the reporting mechanisms. There's a lot less trust within the reporting mechanisms that may be there. So this idea of not that sort of these reporting mechanisms couldn't get abused, but I would say what I have seen, the statistics, lived experience of what I've seen, the likelihood that they get abused is actually very, very small versus the actual incidents that are out there. Oftentimes, it's a challenge to prove discrimination in the home buying process because so many of the actions are personal interactions between a buying and a selling agent. Like that question of, you know, are there good schools in this neighborhood? Well, what does good schools mean? You know, tell me about your buyer, right? The answer to that likely leads to some kind of, you know, discriminatory answer that has to deal with protected class. I'm going to stop talking because I want to give the floor to Ibrahim as well.
Great, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm glad you stated that discrimination is very difficult to prove sometimes. And for the people on the call here, we don't receive many complaints about rates of brokers, for example, but we have received few reporting from some of your colleagues about the appraisal step when they may have concern about a specific person. That okay, we realize that okay, when this person is involved, appraising someone who is from a minority community. We think the person is lowballing our client. So we have received few of those complaints, and the ethic, we're not a licensing agency, so we don't usually have that under our jurisdiction, but we encourage the realtor to be on the look for other potential discrimination, because they engage a lot with their clients. From the time they decide to go through that home buying process, you are the main contact. So you go with them through all the steps, from finding the property. Sometimes you are the main contact for the mortgage broker. They will do the back and forth with you because you have more information about the property than the client. So be on the look and try to figure out when something doesn't feel right. You can just contact Body just to report it and say, this doesn't seem right to me. Or you can encourage, educate, empower your client to file a complaint. There is no wrong time to file a complaint. As long as you contact us, we will investigate. And if there is no discrimination, we'll let you know.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge something that was said earlier about just a fraction of the violations are probably reported. I think Shaila mentioned 1 in 10. We experience the same thing here at the agency, because it takes a lot to step out and be the complainant, because once we don't accept anonymous complaints. So once you step out and are the complainant, there's work ahead for a person. So it really takes some courage and some fortitude to be the complainant and work through this process. And we get the same thing too, where people are reluctant to be that person to file the complaint. So we can only affect the change if we're part of that process, though. So I'm glad you acknowledged that. It's a big step. It's a big leap to be the complainant out there. So thank you for that. So on the last,
Steve, could I make to that point, our process, you don't have to have standing to file the complaint. Maybe it's a screenshot of something, or maybe you witness something, right? We don't want to put the person who is in the protected class in the position where they are re-traumatized by going through our process. So our process, although we don't allow anonymous complaints, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course either, any person can bring forth an allegation of discrimination.
Great. I'm glad you added that. Well, in the few minutes we have remaining, let's just quickly go around and say what tools should real estate licensees have in their toolbox for reporting violations, to support their clients, or perhaps report against another licensee. Let's just circle back. I'm going to go back, Diane, Ibrahim, and Shaila.
In the Code of Ethics and Arbitration Manual and at NAR.Realtor, I think a wonderful risk reduction tool is that Code of Ethics. If you abide by the basic principle in that Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, you likely will not violate matters at the state regulatory body, nor obviously the code, and they probably won't be drug into court either. So I would, best practice is to take a look at, if you refamiliarize yourself with a copy of the code, share it with your clients and customers, and additionally, search for pathways to professionalism. That again is on NAR.Realtor, and it is best practices for realtors to observe. And if those of you who are brokers are on the call today, get it in front of your people to remind them of best practices that they should be adhering to.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I would say self-check. Ask yourself, each time you're engaging with someone, am I treating this person differently? And if your answer is yes, why? And if you can identify any protected class, know that there may be some red flags. And also, Body offers technical assistance. So if your firm or yourself, you want to learn more about this, just contact us. We are more than happy to come give you training around this. We are more than happy to take a look at your project and give you some guidance around of the fair housing. So to self-check, make sure you always ask yourself, am I treating someone differently or somebody else is treating them differently, and why? If you can link that to protected class, file a complaint.
Thank you. It's good, and they're a great resource. BOLI is a great resource. I think you have to remember that most of us in state service care about what we do and are passionate about why we're here. So, don't be afraid to reach out to the folks that can help. Shia, want to wrap up?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the best tools is getting an annual training about fair housing law specifically, so that it's easier to actually identify practices that may be illegal, may be red flags. So really important to do that. With that said, this April marks the 56th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act, and there will be lots of educational opportunities. If you're wanting more education, you can go to fhco.org, our website. Within about a week, we will have our very robust calendar of Fair Housing Month activities listed, and we hope that you consider also joining us at our happy hour celebration for Fair Housing Month. That is Thursday, April 25th from 4 to 8 o'clock, Scandals, downtown Portland. There's my
Nice.
plug.
That's a good plug to end on. So thank you, everybody. If any of you want to put anything in the chat box for contact or anything, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I know they're sharing information at the end. So I'll turn it back to Ashley. Go ahead,
I want to just give a shout out to my manager who's on the call. I don't know who's on the call, but I know he's somewhere in the public. His name is Michael Stenger. He's the manager for Fair Housing Enforcement.
I'm glad they joined. That's awesome. Thank you, everybody. So I guess I'll turn it back to Ashley for the next segment.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, panelists. Great addition to our lineup today, and we're fortunate to have you. Thank you. All right, so we have learned a lot. We do have one more final break here before our last session, so please come back and join us at 11:30. We're about to bring it all together with a panel that was so well loved. We brought it back again. This is going to be our Fair Housing Best Practices in Action panel, and we will begin at 11:30. If you want to drop into the chat to connect, feel free to share your biggest takeaway from today or from that last session, and we will see you guys in a few minutes. All right, we've made it to our last session. Pretty crazy how a couple hours can fly by when we're learning so much together. We are at our last panel now. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to Latasha Beal, who is our past Diversity Key Committee chair. She is also the chair of the OREA board and a principal broker. We are also joined for this session by Percy Wise, lender and educator, Farah Wilder, national speaker on fair housing and DEI in real estate, and Colette Massengale, Senior Policy Representative, Fair Housing Division at the National Association of Realtors. So fair housing can often be discussed as some sort of abstract law that we need to follow to stay out of trouble. We often talk about it in historical terms, and I notice that sometimes folks are so scared of screwing it up that they just kind of don't do anything. And so we're fortunate to be joined by folks today that have hearts for fair housing and excel at making the people that they work with feel welcome and seen. We're excited to hear from this panel and hopefully provide some actionable takeaways as we wrap up our session today. So starting off with our first question, what are 3 practical tips that you have for agents to support fair housing? And why don't we start with Colette?
Oh, absolutely. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for the invitation to be here and to share with this great panel. So I'll just go ahead and dive right in. I would say 3 practical tips for agents to support fair housing. One, I think, and this is, I think, really critical, is educating ourselves about fair housing, the history of housing discrimination, both nationally and locally, so that we understand how our communities and neighborhoods were developed, and more importantly, so we can really see sort of what the connection is between those past practices and those policies and how they're still impacting us today. So educating ourselves, I think, is really critical. And so once we are armed with accurate information, then we can really kind of begin to more effectively educate our clients, so that when we run into situations, we're working with clients who are possibly maybe dealing with discrimination, that we have the knowledge. We, for example, know who the fair housing or know what the fair housing organization in our area is. We've been trained on resources like Fair Haven and Bias Override. So for folks who haven't taken those great trainings that NAR has produced, take those trainings and read the other resources. NAR has some wonderful resources around books and videos and magazines and all sorts of channels to get the information out. And when it comes to educating your clients about fair housing laws on the federal, state, and local level, take the time to do it. Use when you're sitting down with the seller, signing the listing agreement, at that listing appointment, if you happen to have a fair housing provision in the listing agreement, take the time to talk about the requirements at that time. And similarly, when you're sitting down with the buyer during the buyer presentation, use that brokerage agreement and the conversation around that to talk about fair housing laws. I would also add to follow protocols and use checklists consistently. And then finally, I would say, try as best we can not to make assumptions. I think one of the highlights and big takeaways from Long Island Divided is you see the agents kind of talking about what they think the client, what they thought the buyer was looking for, as opposed to really taking the time to ask questions, see what the client wants, and then, move from there. So making your interactions client focused would be the 3 things I would suggest.
Thank you. Awesome recommendations. You said checklists. I know Latasha is a fan of these, so I'm going to pass that question to her next.
Yes, I'm all about that checklist life. I think that's huge. Ensuring you're providing equal services to all clients by using a standard questionnaire of some sort. That way you ask the same set of questions to every set of buyers and sellers. I love that we've talked about Long Island Divided a few times, because I was also going to mention, it seems obvious that you would treat every client the same, but the results of the Long Island Divided Newsday investigation show us that's just not the case. We have biases and we treat people sometimes based on what we think they might want or who we think they might be. And we can avoid all of that by asking a standard set of questions to every buyer or seller to make sure that we're always treating them the same. And I have to quote our fair housing champion, Ashley Contreras. She said, "We are so much more effective at serving clients when we know their story, not just their criteria." I think that's so real. And it's so important for us to come from curiosity. You know, if they want a primary bedroom on the main, why is that important to you? You want an open kitchen, why is that important to you? So when you're asking questions, ask the same questions: finances, family size, neighborhood preferences, accessibility. Are you asking those to every client? You know, are we asking all our clients to remove personal photos before we list a property? You know, providing the same resources to every client. I just think having that specific set of criteria is important, and make sure that you have that list with you at every buyer and seller consult. I also think it's important to include advisories that discuss fair housing at your buyer and seller consultations. Set the stage right up front that you're committed to fair housing, and that's the expectation you have for your clients. Both sets of forms talk about fair housing, so spend a couple seconds or a minute or two just mentioning, by the way, I'm held to a standard of ethics and code of ethics, and I expect fair housing to be, you know, something that we abide by. Be familiar with fair housing resources and down payment assistance programs. And I'm really just piggybacking on Colette. Take bias override or complete Fair Haven. Consider taking At Home with Diversity. You can take Fair Haven again. You can take bias override again. I know someone mentioned previously, do it annually. Every time I take those classes, I learn something new about myself, and I learn something new about a community of people, you know, that I didn't know of. If you're not around different communities of people, you don't know. And so learn about them so that you can be an ally for them.
Love that. Learning mindset goes a long way when it comes to this topic. Percy, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'll just mention too that I'm the membership director of the Oregon chapter of the LGBT Real Estate Alliance, come from an LGBTQ and an anti-racist background. Just definitely wanted to echo what Colette said about education. You know, ask for more continuing education on topics about racism, on LGBTQ discrimination, on the history of Native American displacement and poverty, and the effects of all those on wealth and equality. And I think one of the key reasons we need to do that is, unfortunately, a lot of us haven't gotten that education in our country. And so we need to build our awareness about not only what's occurred, but what we might be doing, and we need to build our compassion. I think there's a lot of people in our profession who think, well, that person doesn't have the down payment, they don't have any skin in the game. And I think by realizing that housing disparities and wealth inequality and fair housing violations are not the fault of the people who are experiencing them, that creates a bridge where we can provide better service to people. And also echoing what Latasha said, you know, you have to take the extra time to go out and research these types of educational trainings, but also the programs are out there. You have to really get into the nitty-gritty of learning about the down payment assistance programs, the IDA savings accounts, the subsidized repair programs. It takes time, and I believe that it is part of our professional obligation to engage in that type of work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I firmly believe that every client we, you know, interact with, even if it's briefly, we have this opportunity to educate and to kind of move that needle in fair housing. And so I love all those pointers. Farah, did you have anything to add to practical tips for agents to support fair housing?
You. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I've been lurking in the background, and there's so much great information here. And so I think my comments will probably supplement, and I don't want to repeat too much. But I will say that for 13 years, I sold homes, and so in Oakland, California. So that's where I'm also drawing some of my advice from. First of all, I can't stress enough, and I'm just going to reiterate that bias training is very important. Ashley, you mentioned, that people, kind of sometimes resistant to this kinds of training or to getting training. And I've experienced that too. Like some people are gonna, they're gonna take every training they possibly can. And sometimes they take every training that isn't about fair housing that they possibly can. New forms come out, legal update. But there's other people who love fair housing and DEI. Every one of us has, if we learn anything from Newsday, every one of us has bias. So in order to make sure that we are properly aware of what it is and, you know, how to navigate the fair housing laws, it's important for us to really learn more about that. And another great resource to really learn more about some of the customs and practices that real estate professionals have that they inadvertently can sometimes use that treat people differently is the great book by Elizabeth Korver Glenn. You can read her book. It's called Race Brokers, or you can Google her, and she has YouTube videos where she's talking about her research, where she followed real estate agents and found, you know, kind of how this bias sometimes can play in very innocuous ways. I have circles that are similar to my background. And just really quickly, a couple more things is that, you know, consistent systems. I'm going to echo that, what Latasha said. It's absolutely critical. If we're going to have bias, one of the best ways to disrupt our bias is to just make sure that you have a system that you're going to use every time a new client comes to you, every time someone comes into an open house, so that you are not, you know, kind of favoring or not favoring or recommending different things for different people. And then I'm going to add a bit of a different one. We love to be, and I say we because I still identify as a real estate agent, even though I've been a staff person at an association and now I'm a consultant, but we love to help people and we want to recommend schools and neighborhoods. We go, oh my gosh, we know that this person would love that neighborhood. They're about to have a family. I think this is a great school. That is something that did come out of the Newsday investigation, that those recommendations can sometimes fall along the lines of bias, even when we're really trying to be helpful and protective and experts about the market. So, you know, really what you want to do is make sure that you let your clients take the lead, listen, as so many of the other panelists have said, to what their needs are, ask them specifically, what does that mean? If they say, I want to be in a good neighborhood, I want my kids to go to a great school, ask them which ones that means. And then if they say they want to be close to something, you know, you just give a radius and you show them every single thing that meets that criteria, just so that your own biases don't kind of creep in there.
Yeah, great recommendations. And it does tie perfectly into our next question. You mentioned, you know, sometimes we can make mistakes without even realizing that we are. And that was one of my takeaways from the bias override and then the Fairhaven video myself. And I had been making a similar mistake to that, you know, even saying something as seemingly innocuous as, oh, I live around the corner, or my kids go to that school. You are kind of implying a sentiment, you know, to your client, and we need to be careful about that. So in the name, you know, and yes. And so what is one thing that you see that brokers may do with the best of intentions, but that can actually open them up for a fair housing violation? Does that question speak to any of you in particular that wants to kind of take the lead on that one? Colette looks like they're nodding.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and start. Just a couple of things around things that brokers do with the best intentions that could open them up to a violation. And I think one is failing to provide consistent fair housing training for agents. I know we do a lot around April being Fair Housing Month, but you know, things that we can do throughout the year, you know, invite local and state fair housing organizations to speak at sales meetings, invite, you know, staff from NAR or the state or local association attorneys to speak at sales meetings, and really emphasize the importance of fair housing throughout the year. So that, I think that's one thing, is just the lack of consistency around fair housing training. Another is failing to use mistakes and missteps as teachable moments for everyone. You know, taking those opportunities when things happen to really kind of draw attention to it and bring everybody in the brokerage into the conversation. And so we make that, we turn that mistake into an opportunity. And then maybe third might be making the assumption. I think sometimes I've heard this around the country, you know, agents feel like, you know, they're following, or brokers feel like their agents are following the law and that there aren't any sort of fair housing issues in that area. And oftentimes that kind of is the thought, and there really are issues we've seen, all over. So I think those are some of the sort of mistakes or assumptions that are not necessarily intentional, but that can lead to fair housing violations.
Yeah, thank you. Latasha, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think right along with what Colette was saying, I think the biggest way we get ourselves opened up to fair housing violations is answering questions we shouldn't answer, like how good are the schools in this area? Or I want to live in a safe neighborhood, and us telling us what that safe neighborhood is or what those good schools are. I'm learning a lot about what good schools means, and that is very different for every parent. I mean, some people want to see diversity in their schools. Some people want to see a very strong special education system in that school. So like, it really depends on your client. And that's why we ask questions to get more information. And I just think we have to get a lot better at providing resources instead of providing answers. We're the real estate expert. You want to negotiate some inspections? I'm here for it. You want to talk about timelines? You want to talk about good schools and crime? That's outside of my area of expertise, and my bias comes into play in that situation. So I think it's important for us to remember, don't rattle off crime statistics or the best schools in your neighborhood. Find the resources that you can provide to your clients, direct them to the police department, show them where they can go find demographic information. And then again, I know we keep saying it, the consistent checklists and conversations with your clients so that you're treating the buy side and the list side the same for every client. Whenever there is a fair housing complaint against a realtor, we get to prove that we're consistent. We get to prove, no, I don't discriminate because this is the procedure that I follow. And so it helps us, it protects us, and it keeps us on track. And so I think it's just important as a fail-safe to make sure that you are doing that with every client. I would be lost without my checklist, I think. I just don't even know. So I think it's just super important.
Awesome. Farah, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure, and I'll go in a different direction so as not to be redundant, but I think there's two things I want to say. I think that sometimes realtors want to be really supportive of their clients, and so when their clients are, like maybe you have a listing and the seller is like, I want to go in this direction with the buyer, I want this or that, and there can be a fear of correcting that or saying anything about that. So I would say, don't be afraid to kind of use your advisor role in the same way that you would with disclosures or any other requirement that the seller has, because it really does help them. It's protecting them to kind of let them know about, remind them of their fair housing, or they may have not ever been aware of their fair housing education. They don't have that requirement to be a seller of a house, but realtors certainly do. So, remember that that's part of your role. And I think sometimes people get afraid. And then also, I think there might be something that your client is experiencing from a lender at an open house, and they might bring it up or from a colleague. And so you might go, oh, I don't think that happened, or I'm sure that's not the case. And I would say that could be a huge issue if, the person decides to kind of take some action, or if there's a bad outcome and they're kind of looking back at it, and then you have made this statement that downplays or discourages them from exercising their rights. So I would say, really completely support your clients, whether or not you really understand what the issue is or believe it's discrimination. Always direct them to appropriate resources so that they can be completely supported with fair housing.
Thank you. Appreciate those contributions to the conversation. Percy, what did we miss? What else would you throw out there?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, I just want to remember how Alexia started us off this morning saying, our question is aimed at not doing further harm, but that's really the floor. That's the floor of competence, and we really need to be doing much, much better. We're learning that, race-based housing disparities are falling behind instead of getting ahead. So we need to do a lot better than just meeting the floor. But one thing I see is that there can still be a trap. We're a referral-based businesses, and there can still be a trap of making client referrals to realtors and lenders based on the client's protected class, instead of on the competency and a real market-based fit. And I think the fair housing danger in that is that we might not be referring in the way that's really going to meet that client's needs. Okay. It's like Ibrahim said in the last panel, Am I treating this person differently than my other clients? Am I referring them out differently than I would somebody else? Obviously, there are some valid reasons why we would treat clients differently. Like we learned on the disability panel, sometimes equity demands that we provide more or different types of help, but we want to really avoid thinking that we can't help somebody based on what their protected class is.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's been mentioned here a little bit, but we've heard the word fear and we've heard the word mistakes. And, I can see how in some ways that fear of making mistakes has held us back from making more progress in fair housing. And something that I've seen modeled in my trainings and by the leaders that I've been inspired by in DEI efforts is just that willingness to make mistakes and kind of be vulnerable and like modeling that for each other really helps. And so I think that's been a huge one for me in getting more comfortable at holding the line for fair housing and kind of advocating is just, it's not about doing it perfect, but it's about just trying to do it at all, right? And moving that needle. What is one thing that we could start doing today that could make a really impactful difference if you were to give one piece of advice? Latasha, let's start with you.
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback on your last statement. I think that the fear can sometimes hold us back. Sometimes we I don't know what to say or how to say it, but be open to feedback. If you say something and someone's like, hey, you should never say that like that again, receive that, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're going to, none of us are perfect in this space. So we hang out in DEI spaces all the time, but I'm still learning new ways to talk about different communities, and that's always changing, so don't be afraid to say my apologies, thank you for correcting me. I think that's a very humble way to de-escalate any situation when you feel like you may have said something incorrectly. So I just wanted to add that. And then one small thing agents could start doing today that would make a difference: read the Fair Housing Declaration. We have a Fair Housing Declaration that our NAR has. I think that it's not widely known. So I want to get the word out. We have a whole Fair Housing Declaration, y'all. Read it and find an area where you need to be stronger in. Make it a part of your consultations potentially, but it's something that we are declaring. And I think it's important for us all, A, to know it, and B, to continue to get better at some of the areas that are mentioned in that.
Thank you for sharing that resource. Colette, what would be your one thing to start implementing today?
I think we've kind of been hitting on this point a little bit, but I think it's worth repeating. I would say continue to have this sort of, and Latasha, you kind of mentioned it as well, continue to have this learner's mindset. I was at the NAR conference in San Diego after the bias override course. And I was speaking to a member and she said, I love coming to the bias override course because I like to see how the instructors approach it. And I like to see what kind of conversations, every class I've been to is different. I take away something different every time. So I think, if you have that sort of learner mindset, nobody's perfect. We know that everybody has biases and we're all sort of on different, different spots on our journey. We're in different places and we're coming from different perspectives and different experiences. So having the learner mindset, continuing to be open and curious and willing. One of the key takeaways from the bias override course is, being willing to authentically get to know people from different identity groups. So again, I think that speaks to having the open mindset and being, willing to learn and grow both personally and professionally. I think will really go a long way, and just be aware of the resources, on the local, state, and national level. We have podcasts and videos and summits like this where we can constantly garner new information, and that will only help us better serve our clients. So the learning mindset, I think, is really key.
I like that reminder to be intentional, because it seems like, equity doesn't just happen on its own if we all sit around waiting for it to. So,
right.
Okay, we're almost wrapping up here, but Percy, I'd love to hear from you, and Farah, what is one small thing we could start implementing today?
Farah, do you want to take it?
And we could hear from, both of you guys.
I have real quick. And this is to, this is something that you can do to make a big difference. Never tell someone that they can't buy. So someone comes to you, you know, they don't seem to have enough down payment, their credit seems really low, or their price point seems out of range. What I think everyone should get in the habit of doing is, you know, making a partnership with, there were people on the sessions earlier who you can partner with, who do HUD counseling, home buyer counseling, finding if you don't, and you may not know because maybe you help mostly investors or you have just listings, making sure that you have a partner that you can send that first-time buyer to. Maybe it's a lender who knows first-time buyer programs who can get their credit really quickly repaired. So I would say, you know, get your team together, find those resources, and keep everyone in the loop, because there are constantly programs coming out and you never know. And if that person is already anxious or afraid or not entirely sure, the market's going crazy, the news says scary things, they might be able to buy, especially at a price here where they might be able to afford before it goes crazy. And they might not ever get connected to those resources. And then it might be even more difficult and unaffordable if they do try to get back in there.
Yes. Yeah, we are the gatekeepers. You know, when that lead comes in, I mean, the way that person's situation is handled could be make or break for their homeownership journey. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love
Percy,
that.
any
I
final?
love hearing that. Yeah, I always tell my buyers, if they're not ready, I tell them, you're not quite ready today, but I'm here to help you get ready. I don't care if it takes a year, if it takes 2 years, I'll be here with you through that process. Don't turn people away. My add to this is going to be supporting housing development and affordable housing. I think there's still a lot of perception out there in the community that somehow housing development is capitalistic or predatory. But we just heard earlier this morning that as a nation, we are 500 million housing units short, and we need housing. We need more housing, so we can contribute to that positive regard of housing development.
It's a great point to make as well. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for participating and contributing your expertise today. We're really fortunate to have you and appreciate your contributions. Thank you. All right, guys, here we are at the last few minutes of our Fair Housing Summit. Wow, that was 3 hours of information. Thank you again to Colette, Farah, Latasha, and Percy on that last panel for wrapping us up. I've learned so much today. Like I said, been taking notes, and I just feel reinvigorated by the room and by all of your energy. So thank you for dedicating yourselves to fair housing today. We do have optional breakout rooms at the end of the session now. So if you'd like to stay, decompress, learn some more, connect, we encourage you to jump into one of these breakout rooms. If you want to connect with fellow attendees or the affinity groups, we encourage you to join one of these networking spaces. That link to those rooms will be in the chat in just a minute. Once again, we do want to say thank you to our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we would not be able to put on this type of an event. Our gold sponsor today is WVMLS. Thank you. Our silver sponsor is Online Ed and Realtor.com. And our bronze sponsor today is the Grand Hotel and OCMLS. Before you leave, please note that your CE will be processed in a week. You should have that before the end of the month. Please look out for an email with resources, links, and a survey. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's event. That's how we keep these events coming, and that's how we make them really impactful and meaningful, is by receiving your feedback. This recording will also be available for 1 more month for free, but no CE. And then after that, there will be a CE version available for purchase. Finally, thank you so much for joining us as your 2024 Diversity Committee Chair. I've got goosebumps right now just thinking about you know, how meaningful it is to learn alongside my peers today. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time, and we will see you around. Thank you.